Imagine living in Moscow right now. For years, you've enjoyed being in the lap of Russian luxury. Putin told you that you would always be safe. Nobody could ever attack the Russian capital. Even after he started his insane war in Ukraine, Putin assured you that Moscow would never be touched. Ukraine just couldn't do it. Oh, how times have changed. Ukraine just hit Moscow hard, again. Putin can't protect his capital as the drones fly, the bombs fall, and air defenses that are supposed to be impenetrable have more holes punched into them than Swiss cheese. We head to the small town of Noginsk. Located about 50 kilometers away from the Kremlin, this town seems nondescript. A little bit boring, but nestled away in Noginsk is an oil storage facility that serves the capital, which makes the town a target for Ukraine. And boy did Ukraine ever hit that target dead center. On July 18th, news broke that Ukraine's drones had scored direct hits on the Noginsk oil depot. Russia hasn't been able to hide the strike. It couldn't. The Moscow regional governor, Andrei Vorobyov, has already confirmed that Russia's most important region came under a drone attack from Ukraine. That flies in the face of Russia's usual tactic of trying to pretend that nothing has happened, but when you see the footage, you'll know why. Where there's smoke, there's fire. And there is a hell of a lot of smoke rising from the oil depot in Noginsk. Astra and Xelenova Plus, which are both bastions of independent reporting from inside Russia that expose the reality of what happens in the wake of Ukraine's drone strikes, have shared video and photographs from the scene. On the morning of July 18th, eyewitnesses published footage showing a fire and explosions. An Astra OSINT analyst determined that the facility on fire is the Noginsk oil depot in the Moscow region, Astra declared, as it shared a video of a huge plume of smoke rising from the depot, along with a geolocated image showing precisely what Ukraine struck. Xelenova Plus was a little more succinct. Noginsk oil storage continues to burn, the outlet said, along with sharing a trio of videos showing the smoke and licks of flame kissing the sky. There's no hiding this from the people in a small town. Everybody who lives in Noginsk would have heard the buzzing of drones, seen Russian air defenses fail, and can feel the heat from the flames if they dare to come close to the town's oil depot. Ukraine hasn't been shy about publicizing this latest win over Russia. President Volodymyr Zelensky took to Facebook to share a reel, offering even more footage of the smoke, along with some videos of the drones Ukraine used. Today, our long-range sanctions worked across 3 areas on Russian territory, as well as on our temporarily occupied land and at sea, Ukraine's president roared. He also gave us a little hint. It wasn't just Noginsk that Ukraine struck. Ukraine's drone operators rarely focus on a single target in isolation. Other facilities have burned, with another of those being far too close to the Kremlin for the comfort of Putin and his cronies. We'll get to those other facilities, but first, the Noginsk oil depot was a major target for a few reasons. United 24 media reports that Noginsk is home to 24 fuel storage tanks that combine for a capacity of 11,500 cubic meters. That fuel, which includes diesel, gasoline, and kerosene, is stored as it awaits delivery to traders and suppliers all over Moscow. So you guessed it, Ukraine just pulled off another strike that makes Russia's fuel crisis worse than it was before. The fire in Noginsk will lead to empty gas tanks in vehicles all over Moscow. This is Ukraine once again showing Putin's people that he can't protect the most important city in all of Russia. Putin also can't protect one of Russia's most important logistical hubs. As the Noginsk depot burned, Ukraine had its eyes on an arguably larger prize. Also near Moscow sits the Wild Berries Logistics Warehouse. Located in the town of Elektrostal, this massive 188,000 square meter facility belongs to one of Russia's largest online retailers, which operates a massive e-commerce marketplace that is somewhat similar to Amazon, though on a Russia-wide scale. We know that Wild Berries has both civilian and military uses. Astra reports that the retailer supplies drone tuning tools and other military equipment, along with consumer products that are sold all across Russia. Now it's just like the Noginsk oil depot, burning after a powerful Ukraine drone strike. The smoke that rises from the Wild Berries warehouse is even more intense than that seen at Noginsk, suggesting that Ukraine has wrecked a massive portion of this Moscow Oblast-based warehouse. Right now, the total damage done is being assessed. However, Euromaidan Press says that some estimates believe that as much as $1.3 billion worth of merchandise is aflame at Wild Berries right now. That's not a bad day's work for long-range drones that cost a fraction of that amount. These figures also come from Russian monitoring channels, Euromaidan press reports, and Ukraine's assessment may end up revealing far higher losses. So we know that Wildberries sells military equipment, but the question has to be asked, why this site? Part of the reason Ukraine struck the Wildberries warehouse comes down to location. Elektrostal is only 60 kilometers or so from Moscow, so a strike in that town reiterates the message that Ukraine wants to ram down Russia's throat about how Moscow's air defenses are utterly failing to protect the city. However, there is also an element of revenge to this strike. One of the more underreported aspects of Russia's long-range campaign against Ukraine is that Russia has repeatedly targeted similar types of facilities that serve the Ukrainian military and people. One of Ukraine's own most important online retailers, Nova Poshta, has been the repeated target of Russian drones and missiles since Putin launched his war. One of Ukraine's largest postal and logistics operators, Nova Poshta, has warehouses all over Ukraine. In October 2023, a Russian missile struck the Nova Poshta terminal in Korotych, which is in the Kharkiv Oblast. 6 employees died, 17 more people were injured, and hundreds of packages were destroyed by that missile. Fast forward to mid-2026, and Russia seems to have focused on Nova Poshta as a regular target. On July 2nd, a Russian Shahid-type drone hit one of the company's sorting centers in Zaporizhia. The next day, more Russian drones targeted another sorting center, this time in Dnipro. And the attacks keep on coming. A strike against the Nova Poshta terminal in Kyiv on July 5th, another against a terminal in Kryvyi Rih soon after. Russia has also been hitting Nova Poshta branches as it did in Chernihiv in early July and in Kramatorsk on July 16th. Russia clearly thinks that disrupting civilian logistics is a legitimate war strategy. What's good for the cooked Russian goose is good for the Ukrainian gander. The Wildberries warehouse burning shows Putin that his attempts to cripple one of Ukraine's largest delivery companies can be met with fire in kind. We have just seen the complete failure of Moscow's air defenses to do anything against Ukraine's drones. And behind this problem lies another. This isn't the first time that those defenses have failed. Moscow has become a regular target for Ukraine. These most recent strikes come on the back of others that showcase how vulnerable Russia's most important city has become. Back in May, Ukraine unleashed one of its largest drone assaults against Russia so far, with a week of attacks that struck several key targets in Moscow, including the refinery that creates much of the fuel used by Moscow's residents. A month later, that refinery was hit again, with the fires being so strong that they led to residents of Moscow complaining about black rain falling onto their streets. This is the new reality for Moscow's residents in 2026. They were supposed to be the safest people in Russia. Sure, they weren't further away from Ukraine than people living in Siberia or in Russia's other far reaches, but they were in Moscow, the jewel in the Russian crown, surrounded by layers of air defenses so thick that not even a fly should have been able to penetrate them. Putin told them that they would be safe, but the illusion has been shattered now, just like the oil refineries, depots, and warehouses in Moscow that burn after yet more of Ukraine's drones scored direct hits. Moscow is a haven no more. It's a target. And to understand why that matters, we need to dig deeper into the myth of Moscow's air defenses, exposing why everything that Putin tries to do to protect Russia's capital fails. But before we do, this is The Military Show. If this is the kind of insight that you want to see, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. We break it down like this every single week. So Moscow's air defenses, what the hell has happened? That'll be the question ringing in the minds of millions of Muscovites as they see yet another report of key facilities in and around their city burning. And the incredulous tone in that question is to be expected, because Moscow is supposed to be protected by layers of air defenses that stop anything like this from happening. There is even a name for these layers of defenses, the Iron Ring. Moscow had always been well defended, but as far back as May 2025, Russia was seen strengthening those air defenses with new air defense positions installed along the city's central ring road and the concrete ring that runs parallel to this road. Those defenses were about 50 kilometers away from Moscow, ironically about the same distance away from the city as the targets that Ukraine struck on July 18th. Moving forward a year, Russia was still strengthening the Iron Ring, this time ahead of the pathetic Victory Day parade that saw Russia refuse to show off any of its military equipment for fear that Ukraine would strike it. The Kyiv Post reported on dozens of air defense towers being erected around Russia's capital, 43 in total, all of which had been built during the previous 12 months. To the average observer, Moscow's reputation as a fortress that could defend against anything that comes from the skies seemed well deserved. The reality, as we now see, is far different. There have been hints of Russia's air defense desperation around Moscow in the past few weeks. Report after report tells us that Russia has been actively pulling air defenses away from the front lines to protect the Russian capital. This isn't a showcase of strength. It's an indicator that Russia's air defenses are weak against Ukraine's drones, and the only strategy that the Kremlin has is the one that is used on the Ukrainian battlefield: quantity over quality. On June 24th, the Kyiv Independent reported that Russia had redeployed air defenses to both Moscow and the Kerch Bridge that feeds into Crimea, both due to fear over the intensification of Ukrainian drone strikes. That claim came from Zelensky himself, and follow-up reporting soon proved him right. On July 15th, the Kyiv Post reported that air defenses previously located at some of Russia's most important Arctic bases, including Rogachevo and Severodvinsk, had mysteriously disappeared. S-300 and S-400 air defense systems had been located, many of which found their way toward Moscow. A few days later, on July 19th, Defense Express revealed that Russia had also moved S-300s and S-400s from the Sevmash and Zvezdochka shipyards, the former of which is Russia's only shipyard capable of building nuclear submarines, while the latter is one of the few that Russia has that can carry out repairs on Russian warships that are nuclear-powered. 28 launchers in total were moved, some redeployed to Crimea and others to Moscow. What this shows us is fear, a lot of it. Russia is clearly dealing with an air defense crisis as Ukraine's drones grow stronger, and the Kremlin grapples with the fact that Russia is too big to defend entirely. So Moscow, along with Crimea, has become a priority. Other key sites have to be weakened to defend the capital city that Putin always promised would never be touched by the war that he started. But none of these desperate actions have worked. Why? There are a few issues that Russia has, all of which are revealed in a June 19th Medusa report. Ukraine's drone volume is an obvious problem. In 2026, Ukraine isn't sending a few dozen drones into Russia, it's sending hundreds with each attack. In this case, quantity is very important. More drones means greater strain placed on Russian air defense. Those defenses could shoot 100 drones down and still miss 5 or 6 that break through and hit their targets. Medusa also points to Russia lacking any sort of drone detection system in its border regions, in addition to lacking a centralized system that allows for information sharing between regions that are likely to be targeted. In other words, Ukraine can pick through Russia's border defenses, and Moscow has no idea that Ukraine's drones are coming for it until air defense radars installed around the city pick them up. Any response then is panicked, reactionary. Moscow can't prepare ahead of time because it doesn't have the data. And finally, there are the defenses themselves. We talked about S-300s and S-400s earlier. They, alongside most of Russia's air defense systems, are made to tackle missiles and aircraft. Drones are different. They're smaller and they fly lower than the intended targets of most of Russia's air defense systems, which means those defenses either can't track Ukraine's drones or can't hit them once those drones are discovered. Low-flying drones also create the possibility of misfires. An air defense missile flying tens of kilometers up to strike an aircraft is very unlikely to hit a target close to the ground. But a missile attacking a drone that is only a few kilometers above the ground, that's a different story. The short version of all of this is that more doesn't mean better for Russia when it's dealing with drones. The buildup of the Iron Ring doesn't matter. That ring isn't designed to deal with the drones that Ukraine is sending. And we see that when those drones still strike targets that are short a few dozen kilometers away from the Kremlin. Now we feel like we're forgetting something here. Of course. Think back to Zelensky's comments about what Ukraine hit in its most recent strikes. He said there were 3 targets. We've told you about 2 of them. The third wasn't in Moscow, which shows us how impressive Ukraine's deep strike campaign has become. It can strike all over Russia in a single night, hitting the capital and targets many kilometers away in expertly coordinated attacks. Ukraine's third target was in Stavropol Krai, where Ukraine's security service scored hits against a trio of oil depots, when the Ukrainian armed forces then followed up with a strike against another fuel facility in the region. Stavropol Krai is nowhere near Moscow. It's almost 1,300 kilometers away from Russia's capital, which again shows us the scale and depth of Ukraine's drone assaults. In this region, fires were recorded at the village of Vyazniki and in northern Stavropol. We mentioned Ukraine's targeting of Russian fuel earlier. This is just another example. No matter where you are in Russia, you're watching gasoline and diesel burn rather than being pumped into your vehicle. That's pain brought back to Russia in a way that Putin promised would never happen. With that, we come nicely to the final point we'll make in this video. Putin can't protect Russia or its capital anymore, and Putin knows it. We've even seen a hint of admission from Russia's so-called Great Protector that Russia can't do much of anything to stop Ukraine from striking Moscow or any other region that it wants to hit. The decision not to showcase military equipment at the 2026 Victory Day parade was an admission. There was no reason to pull that equipment outside of Russia being terrified of Ukraine's drones. That terror tells the people everything about how much confidence the Kremlin really has in Moscow's air defenses. As the fuel crisis tears through Russia, Putin has also been forced into a rare public admission that maybe, just maybe, the long queues at rapidly emptying gas stations might be a sign that Ukraine is enjoying more success than Putin ever thought it would. Russia's leader never wanted to make these admissions. This is a man who tries to hide as much of the reality of the war he started from his people, especially those in Moscow. But the fires on the ground, the smoke in the skies, and the emptying of the pumps can't be hidden. Putin has lost control. He knows it, and he's doing best to make sure that the Russian people don't figure it out. But those people are seeing the hints. Putin can no longer convince the people of Moscow or anywhere else in Russia that this war doesn't affect them. It does. They see it every day when yet more of Ukraine's drones go buzzing over their heads. The Atlantic Council points to Ukrainian strikes against St. Petersburg back in June, which were timed to coincide with the arrival of thousands of people, many from overseas, into the city for the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Those strikes sparked debate inside Russia about whether the country's air defenses are fit for purpose. Most of those debates will be raging now that even more targets in the Moscow Oblast have been struck. And the obvious answer that nobody who asks about Russia's air defenses will reach is that no, the defenses are not good enough. They're also not going to get any better, no matter how many systems and radars Putin pulls from the front. Cast yourself back into the mind of a Muscovite right now. You've just seen the news break about yet more Ukrainian strikes just a few kilometers from your city. You know there's a fuel crisis in Russia. Even Putin has admitted it. If you're on the outskirts of the city, you might even be able to see the smoke rising from the oil depot or the warehouse that was just struck. Even if you can't, the notification you just got on your Wildberries account that your delivery is going to be unexpectedly delayed is a hint that something bad is happening. What would you be thinking about Putin in this moment? Perhaps that it's about time that the leader who promised and failed to protect your city should get Russia out of Ukraine. Ukraine's goal is to make so many Russians feel that way that Putin can't ignore them any longer. And with it now being open season on Moscow, the tide of public dissent that Ukraine is trying to create may wash Putin's ambitions away sooner than you might think. After all, it's not like Putin and his cronies can crow about any great success on the ground to counteract the burning facilities in Moscow. Casualties are higher than at any point in 2026. Putin has delayed his deadline for the fall of Donetsk again because of how poorly his troops are doing. And with AI drones triggering budget deficits, along with Ukraine's long-range strikes getting stronger, things are only going from bad to worse for the Russian president. Find out all about that in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get more from The Military Show in your feed. And thank you for watching.